Welcome to GothCast. I'm Dr. Sanders, and today I have an amazing album for you guys. And this is from my favorite band of all time. I know people ask me all the time, well, what's your favorite band? I am one of those few people who have a favorite band, and that is Type O Negative. Just easily, there's no one else comes close to it for me. And today we're going to be taking a look at their second sort of, I'll explain that, but it's considered their second album, Bloody Kisses. Now, I do have this CD, but it is like 1,000 miles away in California right now, but I've listened to this album for so long, and there's just so much to say. So I'm really glad we're covering this today because I wanted to cover Type O Negative album for a while, but it's always hard to cover your favorite band's music. So let's get into it. Now, right off the bat, the reason I said that this is sort of their second album, third maybe, is because they came out with their first official album, Slow, Deep, and Hard, in 1991. And in between that, inside of 1992, there was an album called The Origin of the Feces. Now, this album is kind of a strange one. It takes a few songs from Slow, Deep, and Hard, and also mixes it with new tracks from the band, but it's not a live album. Like, it's billed as a live album by Type O Negative, but The Origin of the Feces is actually basically a studio recording that the band added audience banter and like echo and reverb and stuff to make it sound like a live album. And they also added a whole bunch of jokes and stuff in there. It does have some new stuff, and actually it's a perfect bridge between Slow, Deep, and Hard and Bloody Kisses, because the sound changed so dramatically from their first to their second album. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But this is technically their second full-length album, is Bloody Kisses, and that's what the band considers it to be, their second album. But one of the questions people ask a lot, or definitely is a discussion online, is Type O Negative a goth band? And this is such a weird question because Type O Negative sound has the traits of goth music that a lot of people love, and that is the kind of shimmery, chorusy guitars, like with lots of effects on them, or even like 12 strings, brooding, romantic lyrics. When they're picking up, they have the aggressive, sort of dark tone, that kind of goes across all their music. But Type O Negative evolved very, very quickly throughout each album. Each album is really different than the previous. So if you bought Slow, Deep, and Hard, it'd be hard to believe when Bloody Kisses came out that's the same band. In fact, a lot of reviews at the time, including Rolling Stone's review of Bloody Kisses when it was released, was, oh, this isn't the same band from a few years ago. Like, you wouldn't even believe it. And then October Rust took it even more and evolved it, and by the time you get to World Coming Down, Life Is Killing Me, it still barely resembles even Bloody Kisses. So the band went through a lot of changes, but the macabre lyrics and Peter Steele's booming voice, he's like 6'8" or something, and just this, giant among men, singing these sometimes very twisted love songs, that continues throughout their whole career. And Bloody Kisses, I will say, is the most stereotypically goth of all their albums. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So the band had really come from the evolution of Peter Steele's original band, Carnivore, which was more like a thrash metal band, or hardcore, or, as it evolved, especially when they were writing Bloody Kisses, from the heavier sound of Slow, Deep, and Hard, Peter Steele was asked, like, oh, why is there such a dramatic shift in sound? And he's like, well, 3 years of writing is going to do that. And this album has so many cool elements in it. Of course, I'll get it out, talk about it right now. People are probably thinking Type O Negative, Bloody Kisses, they're thinking the song Black Number One. And yes, this song has every goth cliche. It's almost a goth anthem, especially for the 90s. And so it's great. I will agree. Like, it's super long. It has a lot of really cool parts, a lot of really great guitar parts. The harpsichord sounding keyboard, especially the one part really sounds like the Addams Family, the dun-dun-dun-dun. It has lyrics that specifically reference goth culture, talking about clove cigarettes, you know, black hair dye, just everything about it is supposed to be referencing gothic culture. And that's one of the strange things about it is, and something people don't really understand about typo negatives. Typo negative will often directly reference things in the real world, and they have a kind of subtle sense of humor. And this was really meant as kind of a joke on goth culture, but it also did it in the style. So I like to think they took it somewhat seriously, but they also did it with a very tongue-in-cheek manner. And I still like its kind of humorous take on goth, because I think it kind of really goes with how serious most goths will take themselves. You know, most people are just kind of goofballs, and I find that is true for a lot of goth people. And this song is sort of the perfect encapsulation of that. You also have the song Christian Woman, which it was a pretty big hit, and there's actually two specific versions of it. There's actually two specific music videos. There's one that's a shorter music video that's more like standard of the band playing, and then there's another one which is actually the full 9-minute song, which I guess was banned for a number of reasons, if you watch it. But I've never been so hot on Christian Woman. Well, that sounds kind of weird when I say that, but I've never been the biggest fan of that song. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a really good song, but like some people are like, this is like the best typo negative song ever. Not my favorite. I like the slow part and stuff where Kenny Hickey comes in with the 12-string guitar, and one of the things I really like about this album is actually Kenny Hickey's use of the 12-string guitar on a lot of different songs, especially on Blood and Fire when he's playing the breakdown part and gets that, and that just so good. Like, the instrumentation in this album is probably one of my favorite things. It has this sort of perfect blend where it's sort of like metal style drums, like Sal Abrascado's drums, like are very aggressive in most songs, and even when they're not, like in songs like Can't Lose You or Set Me on Fire, you have a very aggressive drummer, like, you know, you can just tell like he has a real good groove to it. And I really like that point, like just the hard-hitting drums in this. Which is something that would change as time went on, and I'll talk about that when I review their other albums, because I will eventually cover all Typo Negative's albums because they're all amazing. But just the guitar work, and especially the blend of Peter Steele's distorted bass, Kenny Hickey's guitars, which sometimes are, you know, very, very aggressive in songs like, you know, like We Hate Everyone or Kill All the White People, which I'll talk about in a second. Even songs like Christian Woman and stuff, but Peter Steele's like distorted bass along with Kenny Hickey's guitars and Josh Silver's keyboards, it just makes a sound that's just unmistakably Typo Negative. And this is really the first time we see it, because with Slowly Been Hard, it was much more disjointed. Like, it had really, really good songwriting. I absolutely love it, but this is where the beginning of like the Typo Negative sound that is like the cliched Typo Negative sound, like when people think of them, that's where this came from, is from Bloody Kisses. And was really, by the time we get to World Coming Down, it's kind of perfected. But this was an interesting time for the band, because this album, when released, became a hit. This album went platinum instead of 1993. And that is a really, well, I think it was actually more like 94 when it really broke through, but it was a big hit. And Typo Negative did a lot of touring for this album. In fact, at times in interviews, they mentioned where they'd rather be, you know, working and writing the next album instead of actually being on tour for it.
The Bloody Kisses album has been around for quite a while now, and I'm just beginning to think that maybe you're thinking about writing new songs.
I've had a whole new album written for the past year.
Have you?
However, the record company likes to use Typo Negative the way a prostitute uses her vagina. And so they just want to prostitute us and get the most out of us that they possibly can until this album loses any saleability. And at that point, we'll go back into the studio and make some more noise.
They went on tour, and they actually toured with a lot of strange bands, at least if you think about what Typo Negative sounds like. They toured with Motley Crue, they toured with Pantera, toured with Danzig. I think Danzig makes the most sense, obviously. But there's a lot of different bands who they tour with in support of this record. But other than the super gothic, sort of obvious sounding songs like Christian Woman or Black Number One or even Blood and Fire, one of the most striking things about this record is there's definitely seems to be an influence of the Beatles. Not only do the band members actually admit that, but you can just hear it, or like 70s rock.
Safe to say that we are influenced by all the bands of the late 60s and the early 70s, Beatles, Black Sabbath, Doors, Zeppelin, Cream, anything from like 1965 to 1975. But we are not trying to jump on any bandwagon. We actually try to jump off the bandwagon. Whenever we see a trend happening, we try to go the other way because we don't want to be just like everybody else, because that's too easy to do.
And like in some of the keyboard sounds, I think especially, and like the songs like Can't Lose You, where you have like the sitar sort of sound, and you have Sets Me on Fire, that song obviously is very influenced by kind of 70s rock, and probably the strangest cover ever, although goth bands are obviously known to do a lot of weird covers, you know, Marilyn Manson, oh, it's not goth, right? You know, but like even Sisters of Mercy doing Knocking on Heaven's Door, there's a whole bunch of them. And sure enough, Typo Negative did Summer Breeze by Seals and Crofts. Seals and Crofts? Are there multiple Seals, multiple Crofts? I don't know. They did Summer Breeze, and obviously I like the Typo Negative version a lot more. They really make it their own, which it almost kind of, to me, it was like, why would they even cover the song? You could have called it a different song and nobody would have known, but they really did their own version of it. And Typo Negative would be known to do a lot of different covers as time went on.
Summer breeze makes me feel fine.
Initially, when they were making the album, they wrote different lyrics and actually recorded it and made a version called Summer Girl, where the lyrics were changed. And Seals and Crofts heard it and they denied it. They're like, oh, these are offensive lyrics, blah, 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 and so they went to the more basic, just cover lyrics instead of, using their version. And actually, you can find that version online, Summer Girl. Now, I could, talk about and recommend almost every song on this album, and I will at some point, but I'll talk about some of the inspiration behind some of the different ones that may seem a little confusing if you don't really know why they are that way. So Kill All the White People and We Hate Everyone are obviously the strangest titles on the album, and if you listen to them, it starts off very aggressively, especially Kill All the White People, with Kill All the White People. Well, when the band was touring in Europe, they had a lot of controversy for, when they were doing Slow, Deep, and Hard and Origin of the Feces, and they were labeled as like fascists and Nazis and stuff, where even though the band has, Josh Silver's Jewish, so that's kind of ridiculous. And
I don't like the idea of, being branded a Nazi. And it's funny because back in the States, they call us communists because we have long hair. It's ironic, too, that one of the members of Typo Negative happens to be Jewish. I myself am of Slavic descent.
So they kind of wrote these songs as kind of like, oh, we're not discriminatory. We hate everyone, And it's funny because nowadays, especially since self-depreciation and hatred of everything is so popular on like Instagram or social media and stuff, it's almost like could be the anthem for a new generation, like, oh man, like I hate everyone, blah, 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 Instagram, blah, 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 I guess. You get what I'm saying? I don't even know what I'm saying. What am I saying? What has my life become? But another strange story about, an inspiration for a song on this album is Bloody Kisses of Death in the Family. And super dark, gothic, sort of really sad sounding song. And it was written about Peter Steele's cat, Venus. He had the cat for 17 years as a family cat, and it died. And he wrote the song, you know, in dedication of the cat. And if that's not the most goth thing I've ever heard, then I don't know what world we're living in. But really, like, this album, I love it. It's not my favorite Type O Negative album, I will say that. That's gonna be, I'll just say it. It's October Rust. October Rust is by far my favorite Type O Negative album ever. It's probably my favorite album ever released. Like, no joke. But everything from Type O Negative is so varied and so different and so unique. Like, I can't think of another album that necessarily sounds like this. People always comment on, you know, Peter Steele's voice sounding a lot like Andrew Eldritch. In fact, in a lot of interviews he was asked about, oh, hey, what do you think of Sister Mercy and, you know, Andrew Eldritch, and Peter Steele would often be like, oh, you know, it's just okay that people notice that similarity. You know, we both have similar sounding voices and stuff, and you're just happy to be compared or grouped in with Andrew Eldritch. It seems like nowadays, and especially in the debate of is Type O Negative goth or any of the stuff, like, a lot of people don't take time to actually sit down and listen to this album. You know, of course, Black Number One and Christian Woman, and maybe like Love You to Death, people will listen to, but like, as far as like 90s albums that really represent goth, I think Bloody Kisses is awesome. I think it's absolutely great. There's always this request from people who watch my show to do like cover more 90s goth music, cover more things from the 90s. And a lot of music from that time was a blend of so many things. I mean, I know there's so much love for the 80s goth where a lot of it had very similar elements, you know, between it. You know, especially the same kind of guitar sounds or very similar elements across it all. The 90s gets a little more complicated in some ways, and especially with industrial really hitting the mainstream, you have a ton of that sort of thing. And if you want my recommendation as to one of the best super goth or gothic 90s albums, I just cannot recommend Bloody Kisses more. And this is where it comes to my criticism, my harsh criticism. You'll be saying, Dr. Sanders, this is ridiculous. All you did was say complimentary things about this album and a whole bunch of weird facts that nobody would even care to know. Well, that's kind of my show. But this is my biggest complaint about this album, and that is the soundscape stuff on it. If you bought the original release with the track listing the way it was, it has these soundscapes where it's like machine screws, like it sounds like gears and machinery, and then like a woman moaning, and then you have like one's like a baby crying, and there's a whole bunch of them. And I just think it drags the album down. I honestly do. It just isn't my thing. I don't know. And apparently the band thought so, because when they re-released the album a little bit later in the digipack version, they took those out. They took out all the soundscape tracks and they put in an extra track called Suspended in Dusk. So I don't know if that would be considered the definitive version of the album. In my eyes, I like that version better. I just really do. Some people are really into that soundscape stuff and the in-between tracks. I'm just not into it. So, yeah. If you're wondering what the legacy of Bloody Kisses is, it's that it was the commercial height for Type O Negative. October Rust would go gold, and then World Coming Down and Life Is Killing Me have their own kind of controversies, and even Dead Again. And so in a little way, it's bittersweet, sort of, but it's a great album. Like, that's all that really matters in the end is nowadays, is it a great album? You know, the musicianship, the uniqueness of it is so great. In fact, Josh Silver, the keyboardist for Type O Negative, has his own thoughts about that album, and especially Black Number One, because in the years that followed it, they didn't really like being labeled a goth band, and like most goth bands, so that must make them the most goth if they deny being goth, just like the Sisters and Robert Smith, and, you know. But here's what he had to say about Black Number One and the impact of that album for them. Black Number One was like a spoof. We had an interesting thing happen, and part of the reason why it was commercially successful was because the goth kids thought we were really cool because we were doing Black Number One, and it was about being gothic, and the people who weren't gothic thought it was cool because we were spoofing people who were gothic. So it seems that Josh Silver, especially this album's, you know, from a few years ago now, but when the band was still active, they didn't really want to be known for just spooky, macabre stuff. So do with that information what you will. I still definitely consider it a goth album. People consider it gothic metal, doom metal, you know, like just, you know, the band has always considered themselves like a hard rock, heavy metal band. And that's fine. Like, you know, if that is what that is, then I'm, you know, why am I even saying this? You get it. People will argue all the time about tons of things. And that's just been a constant discussion about this band. Anyway, hopefully you've heard me rant about Bloody Kisses long enough. Type O Negative will pop up again. And man, October Rust, there's a whole bunch of stuff to talk about with that album after, you know, the in-between Bloody Kisses and October Rust. So tune in next time for that. And I hope you enjoy, like, comment, you know, all the YouTube things. I don't need to say it. You know what to do. So stay spooky.